we are ready to move forward with our last two talks. So I'm very excited to introduce a coworker of mine just recently, Eng Ky. And Kim is a data science in the Community Development Division of the Federal Reserve Bank of Minneapolis. As I mentioned earlier today, she co-organizes the Women in Machine Learning and Data Science Twin Cities chapter. We'll post that link in the chat. And she is a regular volunteer for local conferences. And today she's going to be talking about dplyr and data.table and whether the new dtplyr is the summation of those two things. So please take it away, Kim.
Thank you, Lindsay. Hello, everybody. Thank you for staying till the last two talks. And there have been so many great talks, so I hope I live up to the expectation. So today I'm going to talk about dplyr, data.table, and dtplyr. So just a note that this is meant to be a high-level overview of those packages. It is by no means a comprehensive look. I have a few links at the end of my presentation for those of you who are interested in learning more about each or all of these packages. So yeah, and well, before I go into the technical stuff, I would like to tell you a little bit about me. I am originally from Cambodia, and like Lindsay mentioned, I am working as a data scientist. I am a fellow Mac alum, just like Lisa and Heather. And right now I am pursuing a master in statistics at the University of Minnesota. Yeah, and then I am involved with a lot of, well, with a few conferences locally, so including the Women in Analytics and Data Science coming up on October 30th. I organize Vimol DS, I go to Our Ladies, and I have got involved with North this year. So that's it about me. So first, dplyr. So just to get an idea of who my audience is, can you guys give me like a thumb up if you have used this before? All right. Well, I got 2, 3. Okay. Well, I mean, I was expecting to see more because I think, in my opinion, dplyr and its related packages in the tidyverse tend to be very popular among our users. So dplyr package is developed by Hadley Wickham of RStudio. So I added a picture of him right there, just in case you don't know what he looks like. However, there are a lot of other contributors that I want to also recognize. And so dplyr package is meant to be a grammar of data manipulation, providing a consistent set of verbs that help you solve the most common data manipulation challenges. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about what are the dplyr verbs. So dplyr verbs include some of these. So again, this is only a small list of all the verbs that are available in these are only some of the available functions, verbs that are available in dplyr. And again, these are probably the ones that you use for every data manipulation or data cleaning that you do if you use dplyr package. So mutate allows you to add new variables as a function of other existing variables. You can select variables based on their names, and you don't have to use quotation, which means that when you use this in RStudio, it auto-fills for you too. So it can be pretty slick when you try to work with data cleaning. You can use filter to pick cases based on their values. And this is really neat because if you use regular data frame, if you have multiple conditional statements for your filters, you have to use a lot of AND operation between each of the conditions. When you use filter, you can just you can have as many conditional statements as you want, and then you can just separate them by a comma. So it makes your code actually looks it makes your code look better, in my opinion. Summarize is very frequently used summarize is frequently used on its own, but it's also pretty commonly used with summarize is pretty commonly used with group by. So this is allow you to say, for example, count number of observations by whatever group you choose to do the count on. And you can sort your data set using the arrange verb. And so the reason why I'm going through all of this is because towards the end of my presentation, I'll be talking about dtplyr, which utilizes the same kind of verbs, and so it's good to get some familiarity with these if you haven't had the chance to use this package yet. So, for example, this is a pretty simple dplyr code. So what I'm doing here is I'm using a data frame called Star Wars, and I asked them, I asked dplyr to group the data frame by species, and then I want to get some summaries, which is the count number of observation and taking the average mass group by species. And once that part of operation is done, then I want to filter to the species that have at least one observation and their average mass is more than 80. So you can see here that this results in a table of 3 observations. Again, for those of you who are not familiar, a table is a version of a data frame within the tidyverse. So why should you want to use dplyr if you haven't yet? Dplyr is much faster than base R. The syntax is very, very simple and very readable. So like you can see here, I am pretty sure that even if you for those people who haven't, seen R code before, they can understand, they can like get a sense of what this chunk of code is trying to do just by reading the code. And it allows for function chaining. So what do I mean by function chaining? Function chaining can be done using these pipes. So, so if I were to only run this part of the code, it does something. It does this. It does the summaries by species for me. But instead of saving this to like a temp data frame or something, you can just add another pipe to do the filter all together. So everything in one step instead of multiple steps. And then another very cool feature is that it allows you to directly connect to external databases and allow you to translate dplyr code to SQL code so that you can do analysis within those databases. I haven't personally done this myself, but I've heard good things about it. All right, so if dplyr is so great, why am I even talking about data table? So since in the previous presentation, Connor and Heather talked about data table, which is a completely different package. So they were talking about data table in the DT package, which allows you to present tables in like a very nice way. But this data table package is more for data cleaning if you're not familiar. And this data table package was developed by Matt Doyle. I forgot to put his name up here, but here's a picture of him. And then again, there are other contributors too. So data table has been well known for its memory efficiency. It's very fast, even faster than dplyr. The syntax is concise. And the concise syntax has some advantage and disadvantage to it. Because it's concise, it makes it less readable. The other benefit of using data table is that it has a lot of features, and some of those are not available in other packages. So for example, rolling joins. Rolling joins are currently not, you can't do rolling joins using dplyr package. And then they also have enhanced version of other existing functions like the fread and fwrite functions. So these allow you to read and write text files, CSV files really, really fast compared to other read CSV and write CSV functions. Okay, so before I go into, giving you an example of what data table code looks like, I want to share like the general syntax of a data table. So I borrowed this graphic from the machinelearningplus.com. And so here, let's say you have a data table called DT. And so in data table, you usually put your operations within a square bracket right after your data table name. And then there are three main positions in this square bracket. So the first position is the I position. If you are familiar with SQL, the I position can be thought of as the where statement in SQL. And so this is where you do all your row filters. In the second position is the J position, and this is equivalent to SQL select statement. And this allows you to select columns or create new variables or do any operations that you need to do. The third position is the by statement. So this is the same, and this is equivalent to the SQL group by or dplyr group by that we just talked about. And so usually, generally, this is what the syntax look like. So now that we know what to expect, let's take a look at the example. So so to use data table features, we first have to turn the data frame that we have Star Wars into a data table object by using the askDataTable function. And then now here, this is our data table object, and then we have the square bracket. So this is the first part of what we're trying to do, and you can see that in the I position here, I don't have anything. So that means that we're telling data table to use all the observations within Star Wars DT, so no filters. This is the J positions. So what we're doing is, so .n is the counter in data table. So we're counting number of observations and taking the average mass. And then in the by statement, we tell it that, hey, do all of this by species. And I heard somebody laughed. And so that's what it's doing. So it counts and then calculate average mass by species. And then one thing I forgot to mention is that in data table, you can also do chaining. And to do the chaining, so this is the filter part similar to what we just did with dplyr. And so we're telling it that, hey, filter to, you know, n larger than 1 or mass larger than 80, and mass larger than 80, and it gives us the exact same output as in the case of dplyr. Yeah. Oh, and then you can see that here when I add these filter statements, I don't need to add a comma, because if there's only one, if there's only one statement in there, it will translate it as the I statement, which is the row filter statements. Whereas if you use data frame, you would have to use the comma. All right. Okay, so then what is dtplyr? For those of you who have heard about dplyr and data table before, you probably have seen like some pretty heated argument, you know, on the internet over which one is better. Today, I'm not going to argue which is better, but I'm hoping to introduce this package that actually allows us to you know, get both the advantage from both packages into just one. So dplyr is known for its readability and simple syntax, probably you know, less steep learning curve. And then data.table has been pretty well known for its speed. And so the dplyr, you know, so dplyr is it's they so what the authors try to do is to provide a data table backend for dplyr. So what you can do is using all of those dplyr verbs, so very easy easy to understand, but it gives you the speed of data table, so best of both worlds. And again, so dtplyr is still pretty new, so they don't have their own hack sticker yet, which is why I have RStudio here, because people at RStudio are the ones who developed this package. All right. Okay, so but you know, to work with dtplyr, there's a couple steps you have to do before actually going to the actual data cleaning. So in dtplyr package, there's something called lazy DT. So in this case, if your existing data or your existing data set or data object is a data frame, you can use lazy DT, and then you know, there's you don't have to add anything else. You can so the default in lazy DT is to have immutable equals true. Unfortunately, if your data object is a data frame, you cannot use immutable equal false. But if your data object is a data table object, you can turn this immutable equals false. So the immutable equals false allows your data processing to be a little bit faster. I'm going to talk a little more about it in just a little bit, and then it will make a little bit more sense. But so if you have either a data frame object or data table object, these are the two ways that you can turn them into a lazy data table object, lazy DT object for dtplyr. So why lazy data table? So the lazy DT object does not actually evaluate. So it doesn't evaluate until you call as data frame, as table, or as data table at the end. And so so why do they have to do this? So in the earlier version of dtplyr, they actually allow the lazy DT to evaluate every time you call the every time you add an operation and run it. And then it turns out that doing it that way was pretty slow, and I think the performance, I think it was still better than dplyr, but it wasn't significantly faster. And so now that they don't allow it to evaluate until you call the as data frame, as table, as data table, it speeds up much. It speeds up much more. All right. So now let's see an example. So we have the Star Wars lazy from our earlier slide. So right here we have Star Wars lazy is equal lazy DT Star Wars. And then if you notice, this part is exactly the same as dplyr. Nothing has changed, except you need to add the as table at the end to actually tell lazy DT that, hey, right now I'm ready for evaluation, and then it returns the 3x3 table as the result. Okay, so that sounds like dtplyr sounds like a great solution to those of us who may have used dplyr, but think it might be slow for us if we use if we have really large data set. So the other thing I wanted to do was to show you a quick speed test. So I use a library called micro benchmark. So this allows you to, so if you just do system time, you won't really be able to tell the difference between it's like because this is a very small data set with pretty simple operations, we won't be able to tell the difference. So micro benchmark allows us to actually compare compare fast operations and show the difference between all of those operations. All right, so here I have dplyr, and then I have data table. And again, these are the same operations that I have shown earlier. Yeah, so it's just the same code. For dtplyr actually have two different ones. So this first dtplyr code is not, so this is when you don't want to load a data table package at all. You want to use, but you still have to have data table package installed, I believe, but you don't have to load it. So everything is based on dtplyr. And again, so we use the stable lazy. So this is when, you know, we don't actually do the immutable equals file. And now in the second one is the dtplyr2. And this is when we use the immutable equals false, because we already have a data table object. And then at the end, instead of using as table, we'll use as data table. And now let's look at the results. So I want to just point to the median here. Using dplyr, this operation takes about almost 12,000 microseconds. You know, this is like it's fraction of a second. We won't even be able to tell the difference if we just run the code. But imagine, you know, when we have, instead of a few hundred rows of data, we have a few million rows of data. Then this can be a pretty big difference. So now for data table, it's only 1.4 thousand microseconds. That is a very, very large improvement. Now if we use dtplyr just on its own, it still speeds up the dplyr performance by, you know, it doubles the speed. That is still pretty great. But then if you actually use dtplyr along with the data table, you can speed it up even more. I mean, it's still a little slower than data table, but you know, this still, I think it's pretty great because you can use the same syntax with just, you know, making sure you change your table into a lazy dt and then add as table at the end of your operations. That I think it's a lot of reward for little effort. So now, if dtplyr is the backend, the data table backend for dplyr, why is it still slower than data table? Well, dplyr syntax has to be translated to data table syntax, and so that, however, the translation is only one time, and so if you have the larger your data set, you know, the more it becomes negligible. So this is not a big problem if we you know, work with large data set. There are some data table expressions that have yet to have direct dplyr equivalent. So for example, the rolling joins that I talked about earlier, like at this point, I don't believe it is possible yet in the tidyverse syntax. And then the other thing is that the immutable equals false and true. So when the immutable equals true, and you use that with mutate, what mutate does is that it makes a copy before it modifies your column. In data table, it defaults to not making a copy, so it just modifies directly in your data, in your data table. But then in the dtplyr, if you allow the immutable equal false, it tells dtplyr that, like, hey, don't make a copy. And because the underlying object is already a data table object, that is possible. And the other point that I wanted to make is that data table does sub-assign by reference. So this means that if you want to do an operation on like half or like 10% of the rows instead of all of the rows, then data table only you know, assigns those 10% of the rows. It doesn't actually look through all rows in your data table, which makes it even faster. And with that, I have some resources that you can check out if you like, and I believe I still have some time for questions. Thank you.
Awesome, thank you, Kim. If anybody has questions, please post them in the chat. I wanted to point something out. I think maybe you had it on one of your slides, but that basically when you write the dplyr code, it translates it into data table syntax for you. Is that right? Like as part of the output?
Yeah, so that is if you don't use the as table. So if I just run this part here, I actually, oh, wait. Can you see my screen again?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, so if I do the, so I just do this part without the as table, it actually gives the data table syntax. So if you, yeah, that's a really good point, Lindsay, because if you, you know, if you're trying to find the, like how these two packages talk to each other, this would be a pretty cool way of studying it. And I believe there's also a website that Hadley Wickham maintains that shows the translation that they use for the dtplyr package. I can find that and put that in the chat after.
So Lisa Lenway has a question, but is there a certain size data set where you would recommend switching to data table? And in terms of teaching, would you recommend teaching some beginner data table, or would going the dtplyr route be good enough?
Oh, that's a hard question. I have really tried to avoid talking about my preference because I was never taught dplyr going into R. Actually, I already used data table for like 3 years before I even knew dplyr and the tidyverse existed. So I'm a little biased towards data table. However, because I've only used data table, I don't actually know when it would start making a difference. I have seen people saying that like once you reach 10 million rows of data, you will, so it's like 1 million rows of data still manageable, 10 million rows of data, then you start to see the difference in speed. In terms of teaching students, I would probably go with dplyr because I think the learning curve is pretty steep for data table. Okay. But yeah, dtplyr would, like, I think if you know, for those, like for those people, for those of you who want some more speed but don't want to switch to like a completely way of writing, you know, because it is very different, then like I really highly recommend dtplyrs. Like even with just learning more about this in the past few weeks preparing for this presentation, I'm really excited. I'm excited to go and use it more when I collaborate with other people who don't use data table.
So Nimi has a question about what the difference between a data frame and a tibble is.
Well, so if it's a tibble, so let's see here. So if it's a data frame, when you, oh, this is also a table. Okay, let me. Okay, so see, it's like when it's a data frame and you try to print it, R is not data frame is not smart enough to only show you like the top 10 or top 5. It tries to print everything. And then, so this is what it looks like. Whereas in the table, you can see that for each column, it tells you what variable type it is. So it's very, very handy because, you know, with data frame, you usually have to do the str to tell what the str function to kind of like get an idea of what what variable types you have, and also table color code your missing values. And so it's really easy to see like if you have a lot of missing value or you don't. And you know, it's just easier way of working with your data set, I think. Again, it's like I'm not fluent in the tidyverse, but with my limited knowledge, those are some of the benefits that Tibble has.
Excellent. All right, well, thank you again, Kim. We will take a 5-minute break and be back at 11:50 for the last talk of the day.